The 50-10 work-sleep cycle. Now, you probably know or heard of the Pomodoro technique, where you work for 25 minutes and then you have a 5-minute break. Then after a few cycles, you have a longer break. Now, I always wanted to try this, and I sometimes in the past, or at some point in the past, I think I also did, but it just didn't resonate with me. What didn't resonate with me was that I had this idea in my mind of just wanting to go all the time. And I thought it was just a mental thing, and if I could just be on a high enough level, then I could just push through all of the days, all the time, and be awake and alert all the time. Now, of course I needed to sleep, but I also tried to sleep for 4 hours plus 2 hours during the day, so a total of 6 hours. I also had various sleep systems where I slept like 4 hours and then 20 minutes and 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 20 minutes, such that I also would again sleep 6 hours. So I tried various sleep systems over the last years. I also tried various techniques in order to improve my focus during the day, or in order to just not be, tired all day long. And what seemed to have worked as well as nothing before is this system, the 50-10 system. I tried it in the last weeks, and I came up with the system by actually kind of rediscovering one of my old ones. So one of my old systems was that I would take a 2-hour time slot. And now we have to go a little bit into time scheduling, because I usually do time scheduling. You could also call it time blocking. What this means is that I divide an hour usually into blocks of 10 minutes. And within these 10 minutes I do tasks. So in the morning I stand up, I have like 10 minutes to get ready for everything. Then I clean for 10 minutes, then I get my stuff ready for 10 minutes. Then I work out for about 60 minutes, then I stretch for 10 minutes, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. So the 10 minutes is the shortest unit. Now the Pomodoro technique is nice, but it is 25 and 5. So if you want to track your time also, then what do you do with the 5 minutes? 10 minutes is easy. It's basically the system we all, or the Western world at least, uses mostly, and it's dividing the time into 10 minutes. And if you multiply it by 6, you have an hour. Of course, it would be nicer if the hour had maybe 100 minutes, but that's just not the case. So let's work with what we have. Maybe 60-minute hour. Now, because there are so many hours in the day, I usually divide the day of the hours. I usually divide also the day into hours. So, of course, this is something everybody already does. Now, also everybody else already divides maybe the hour into 4 quarter hours. And this is also very reasonable. It is just that for tracking, I also tried 5-minute tracking. I also tried 15-minute tracking, I think, and 20-minute tracking. But sometimes you need something that is shorter than 20 minutes. And sometimes you have things like something that would take 15 minutes and then maybe 5 minutes. It doesn't really matter what all the different scenarios would be. I found that 10 minutes seems to be the most reasonable unit for tracking and also planning and scheduling time. Now, the question is, why the 50? Now, what I tried in the past was taking 2 hours and then trying to work for these 2 hours, but then, because I would sleep 4 hours in the night, plus an additional 2 hours during the day, I would sleep basically 6 times 20 minutes. Now, let's calculate this in the head really quick. That results in an additional 120 minutes, which then results in 6 hours. Now, 6 hours of sleep is probably not sufficient, and I also learned this maybe the hard way in the last years, but sometimes it did work, and then it worked for 3 days, and then it worked for 5 days. And then I'm starting to wonder what I'm doing wrong that it now works, and maybe it's because I work out more intensely if I do this, and maybe it's all because of all these other factors, and maybe it's because I leave out carbohydrates. That's not the point. The point is that if you take 120 minutes and then you basically take out 20 minutes, then you only have 100 left. And 100 is not that much any longer. So the 100 minutes I found are usually very easily distributable, you could say. If you have like 3 hours, then it seems already very long. But if you have 100 minutes, then it's just 10 times 10 minutes. And 10 minutes is a very short time slot. And I also had like hundreds maybe thousands of 10 minutes at this point in time already, and I kind of know what 10 minutes feel like. Of course, you might also know what 10 minutes feel like, but at least in my experience, what 10 minutes of scheduling feels like. Maybe 1 minute is getting into the task, the next 8 minutes are into the task, and the next minute is not in the task, but it's kind of spent wrapping the task up, for example. Now, of course, you cannot switch task all the time. This doesn't mean that I do that I do run for 10 minutes, and then I do a cooking session for 10 minutes, and then I work for a company for 10 minutes. It doesn't work that way. It is just that this is the unit I can multiply. Now, and it's the smallest unit. Now, what I found is the 100 minutes is still kind of long. And also, the problem is that a 2-hour time slot needs to be a 2-hour time slot. The same is true for the Pomodoro technique, sort of. Now, the Pomodoro technique allows you to have this 25 and 5 minute, which is half an hour. Now, what I also found reasonable is to just use the heuristics for time that are already there. Hours, minutes, seconds, and so on and so forth. But also the full hours. Now, of course, you can do a task from, let's say, 8, 19 and 90 seconds to 8:29 and 19 seconds. Or you just get rid of this and you just round this up or round this down. Let's make it 20, and then you work until 8:30. Now, of course, you can take the next larger units, and of course, if I want to leave for somewhere, and sometimes 5 minutes would be the ideal slot, but then I just leave at 10 minutes before, because 10 minutes is the unit I work with. Now, back to the 50-10 system. I found in the last years that the one system with 2 hours was great, but the problem was just that the unit was not small enough. So in order for this to fully work, I had to have them full 2 hours, and then I would work for 100 minutes, and it would also kind of be a short enough time horizon, but it was still a little bit too big. And the second problem was that I often wouldn't sleep for the 20 minutes. But I would be not alert enough in the 100 minutes. So it was basically a problem of distributing my alertness over time. Now, I would then sit still or lie still and try to sleep. Sometimes I would sleep, sometimes I would kind of daydream, sometimes I would just lie still and think about the tasks I had done or needed to do, or other problems that come into my head or came into my head. The thing I eventually discovered is this. It doesn't really make sense to sleep for 20 minutes. The problem is, now, there are different patterns of thought or different perspectives on sleeping 20 minutes. Now, one would be that if you have 10 minutes, then of course you need a little bit of time to get into the sleep or daydreaming or whatever it is. Also, maybe you want to lie down somewhere, or you want to sit down somewhere and maybe change the location in order to basically have a different association. Maybe by lying down, you usually sleep, by standing up, you usually work, or something like this. If you have a certain amount of time which is now proportional to the 10 minutes, then if you have a little bit of setup and set down time, let's just call it set down time, then of course this is proportional to the time itself. So by increasing the base but having these absolutely fixed and not relative to the time slot, if I do this for 20 minutes, I still have the 1 minute setup and set down time, so still 2 minutes, but then it's 20 minutes in total, so the efficiency is bigger at the 20 minutes. But that's just in theory. In practice, what I realized is, of course, you have the setup and the set down time. But you also have a goal to work forward to. And this goal to work forward to is the next hour. And if it's 8, let's say it is 8 in the morning, then what I know is that I work for the next 50 minutes. What if it's 9 in the morning? I know that I work for the next 50 minutes. What if it's 1 in the afternoon? Then I know I work for the next 20 minutes. Not 20 minutes, but 15 minutes. And then I have a 10-minute break. And in this 10-minute break, I seem to, at least if I'm tired enough, which is not always the case, but if I'm not tired enough to kind of daydream in there, or whatever I'm doing in there, in order to, and I don't really know, I can't describe it. Huberman would call it Yoga Nidra or NSDR. I would call it maybe daydreaming, but I'm not a scientist nor anything else that would be of any qualification to explaining this. So it doesn't really matter what I call it. The thing maybe that is just the very basic idea that came up in my mind is this. If I pedal on an air bike, for example, and I air bike. An air bike is basically a bike that also has handles, which allows you to also use your arms in order to increase your power output. Now, if I pedal on the bike, if you have a constant speed, and the constant speed is like this, then you can go at a constant speed for 40 minutes, for example, and have a certain power output. That's what I usually do on one day for cardio. Now, what I also could try, and this is another day, I also kind of do this for cardio, but it's not really just cardiovascular training, it's also respiratory training. So Peter Attia would call this VO2 max training, and I also got the idea from Peter Attia's book Outlive. And now, of course, I also did interval training before, but I didn't really call it VO2 max training, and I also now call it interval training again. Of course, the concept isn't new, but that's what I'm thinking of when I'm doing this. Now, the basic idea is, if you have a constant power output, what you also can do instead is you can have a slightly higher power output, maybe here, but then you need to rest. And what I realized over the last years is simply this. I just cannot go all day long if I wake up, and then go all day long and then sleep, and then go all day long and then sleep. It doesn't work that way. My mind seems to go through different states all the time. It seems to be in different modes, in different emotional zones. I don't know what exactly my mind does all the time. I just know that sometimes I can work and sometimes I cannot work. Now, there seems to be a common pattern, and this common pattern is that I am rested. Now, the rest is ideally also induced somewhat, maybe by a break. So maybe the basic idea of the mind is very similar to the one the body has. The brain is just an organ that consumes maybe power, maybe other things, maybe needs to regenerate. So, of course, you can sleep during the night, and the pattern is also kind of the same if you think about it. You have 24 hours, and then you need to sleep during a certain period of this day, so basically regenerate, until you are able to fully be powered up again. Also, another idea came into my mind in the last few months. I also explained this, I think, in a video, but I might have deleted the video, because I might have made a mistake. Here's the basic idea. If you take a notebook, and you have the notebook, and then you introduce background processes like OneDrive, you do another backup to another cloud at the same time, then you open lots of programs, maybe different YouTube videos. All of these then use processing power. Now, what these do, especially the backup processes, is they take processing power out of all of the processing power that there is at some point in time. So basically, an infinitely small point in time, they take processing power out of it. If these are the 100%, then maybe this is the background process. This much of the power output is just background processes. Now, what you also could do is you could schedule the backup weekly, for example, but then it takes even more kind of the processing power, or you cannot really do much of it if you don't have it constantly running, because if it is running constantly, then it does incremental backups, whereas if you back it up once a week, for example, then it takes like 3 hours and backs it all up in one go, but you can't use the notebook very well. And this is kind of what sleep is. So maybe the idea is that instead of having this low power output for most of the time, you just take the power output and distribute it differently, basically on a larger frequency. And this larger frequency happens to be maybe a day if we now views sleep basically as such a background process, such a regeneration process. And the same maybe is true for a very short time, which maybe would be the day. Also, I heard recently on Huberman's podcast. So Andrew Huberman is a professor at Stanford, and he has a podcast where he talks about optimizing health, basically, maybe simplified optimizing health. And in there, he lectures about many different things, but one thing he recently mentioned was also that you basically need to regenerate dopamine before it is running out. So if you are going and relying on dopamine, and then you're suddenly tired, and you don't want to do anything, and everything seems like it doesn't make any sense, and what are you doing here even anyway, then maybe you just crossed the threshold already. So instead of, just like on the interval workouts, if I do the interval workouts, and I do them like this, and like this, and like this, then I am regenerating. But if I'm using too much power in the first ones, then I'm not regenerating, and I'm able to only produce smaller and smaller peaks. So the idea is that you need to regenerate at a certain point in time. Huberman often mentioned that it is a 90-minute cycle we all usually work with. Now, maybe it's a 90-minute cycle, but what I found for me is that it's much easier to calculate my time if I just don't use a 90-minute cycle, but instead a 60-minute cycle, and I take 10 minutes out of it. Now, currently I do not take the 10 minutes and add this to my sleep in total sleep time over the day, because I usually also don't sleep during these. Sometimes I actually do sleep, and sometimes I don't. It also depends. And what I also think of this is kind of a backup. This allows me to keep running through a day. Now, of course, this, a large disclaimer, only works if you can divide your time totally on yourself. I'm currently working one time a day at a sports facility, and there I cannot calculate my time, or cannot divide my time. So I also cannot do the system. But if I'm, for example, at the library, or if I can divide my time, I usually just do this if I need it. Now, if I find myself working for 4 hours and enjoying the process, then maybe I forget totally about this. But this seems to be a process I can come back on, even if I'm overslept. If I know this, and I also know that eventually I can take a longer break if I need. So I basically, at every 50th minute, I want to be at a point where I'm on a couch somewhere and usually lying down, and then I just put on a sleep mask. When it's in the library, when it is in the library, I just put on a sleep mask, and then I have alarm. So it's not really an alarm, it's a reminder. And this reminder is on my Galaxy Watch, and it is synced with my calendar. So in my calendar, I basically have a reminder set for the next full hour, where the next full working hour begins. And this reminder is just one vibration. And this one vibration then usually wakes me up. So it's not a big deal with scheduling, even though there seems to be a scheduling conflict kind of between, or a syncing conflict rather, between Samsung and Google. So both have kind of access to Google Calendar, but Samsung seems to have seems to be running a different schedule, even though it's the same calendar. And this is a problem I haven't been able to resolve until now. Now, what this allowed me in the last weeks basically is, even if I only slept like 2 hours a night, which sometimes happens because sometimes I think about things in the night and then I can sleep, or sometimes I overslept and then I cannot sleep at night, and so on and so forth. What this allowed me to do is I can, at any point during the day, arrive basically in the day, then wait for the next slot. I also try to not vary these. So sometimes I do sleep at other times, or what I also try to do is, if I really need more sleep, then the one vibration is basically a too low threshold for the body to wake up. So if I really need to sleep, and of course I have to keep in mind that if I have an appointment afterwards or something like this, then I have to maybe set an extra alarm. But if I don't, then I hear, or maybe I don't hear the first vibration, or I hear it, but I don't remember it afterwards. Just like you might not remember your alarm that is set in the morning, and then was the alarm even going off? Now, as I mentioned, I then, if I want to sleep longer, I just maybe, for example, today I lie down at 50, and then I just slept for 30 minutes in total. I didn't really sleep, but what often comes to mind in these situations is kind of visualizations, what an ideal outcome would be. And this seems to get my dopamine system going, and then I actually try to, so by creating the ideal outcome, but at the same time knowing that this is just not the expectation I should expect, basically, but it is just an ideal outcome, I can basically approximate the ideal outcome a little bit better. But this is just another thing. This might also be something you might hear on Huberman in some way or another, but I cannot think of any recent episode where he mentioned something like this. In short, the 50-10 sleep system allows me to, at any point during the day, click into the system. I don't have to say, okay, for the next 25 minutes, and now it is not 25 minutes, but it's 3 p.m. and 26 minutes, for example, and then I need to have for the next 25 minutes, and then it's an uneven number of minutes, and then it doesn't work, and then what if an alarm goes off, or what if something else is at 4, and then I have like 25 minutes and 5 minutes. If I can take the 50-minute slot, I take it. If I'm out and about, for example, then I don't take it. If I'm working out at the gym and I'm working out till 50, then I stretch at 50 basically. So I work out till 50, I stretch at 50, which is a little bit similar, but I also just don't take it if I don't have the opportunity to. So this allows me during the day to switch, to click into the system and to click out of the system at every given hour. It allows me to start at the normal hour, so I can start at 8, I can start working at 9, at 10, at 11, even if I have worked before. And it also, one of the most important parts, I think, is that this short 10-minute period seems to somewhat reset my mind. No matter what I did before, no matter what I worried before, if I am lying down for 10 minutes and I'm just thinking about basically nothing, I'm basically allowing my mind to turn off because I'm not doing anything. It is clear that for the next 10 minutes I will be doing absolutely nothing in order to accomplish this goal or that goal, or work on this task or that task. Or if I have this worry, then for the next 10 minutes I can do absolutely nothing about it. Yeah, maybe I can already schedule something or plan something, but I don't have any responsibility. So this would be maybe another frame to think about this. Responsibility. Usually I have responsibility for meeting all of the different expectations of myself and others, on myself, and so on and so forth. But during these 10 minutes, similar to during sleep, I just don't have any responsibility. Apart from maybe recovering, but then again, maybe that's not the purpose of this recovery period. So it doesn't need to be sleep. For me, it is just a recovery period, and it seems to work, and it seems to make my days more joyful, and I am glad that I finally found this. So currently I'm trying to sleep 6 hours a night, and then this during the day, but what I usually find is that the 6 hours are not enough, but I seem to be unable to resolve this issue. So ideally, you probably would sleep anywhere from 7 to 9 hours, or maybe on average 10 hours, not 10 hours, but 8 hours, and maybe only have a 10 to 20 minute nap during the day, and not have naps that are longer, I think, than 40 minutes is what is cited on Huberman. Huberman also has kind of a sleep protocol, so this is maybe what you could read up in this regard. Nonetheless, this is the 50 to 10 sleep system.